In the last video, I showed you how to restore the firmware file using the TFTP protocol from the boot menu so that you can fix your broken FortiGate device. In this video, I want to show you how to restore the configuration back to the original status so that you can get all your policies, your configuration back to your device after you have fixed the firmware version. Now we are back to the firmware original configuration. If I try to access my firewall using the original link, it will no longer work because as you see, I was using a custom board in the firewall and this is no longer set. I lost all my configuration. And that's why you always have to keep a configuration file from your FortiGate so that you can restore it in the case of a disaster recovery like this one. So I want to show you how to download the configuration backup in case you need it in the future. And the way you download a full backup of your firewall configuration, you simply log into your firewall. And I just want you to go in the admin menu on the top and just go to configuration backup. In here, you can choose to encrypt the configuration file with a simple password, or if you are downloading this locally, you can simply download it with no password as well. So I want to go ahead and click OK. Now this will download for me the configuration file, which looks like this. It will contain all the configuration that I have on my firewall, and I can use this configuration file to restore a new firewall into the same configuration set that is on my current device. Or also if you are using FortiManager, I have a full course on FortiManager. You can use the FortiManager built-in revisioning system so that you can download a revision with the current configuration set on your device at any point of time. But if you don't use FortiManager to centrally manage your devices, simply try to keep a backup for your firewall before and after you make major configuration changes so that you can use it in disaster recovery situation. Now we have the configuration backup we had downloaded before. It's right here in .conf format. Now, as I set a static IP address so I can restore my firmware in the previous video, I want to remove this so that I can get access back to my internal LAN on the firewall. So now let me open my IPv4. Let's go into properties and I want to make it an IPDHCP one more time. Click OK. Now let's try to open the CMD and let's try the ipconfig/all command. And if I go to my Ethernet side, you will see that I got an IP address 192.168.1.111, and I'm no longer using the 172.20 network. That's because all the configuration is back to the default. So now we need to come back in here and just remove the custom board that we were using before we lose the firewall. Now we are accessing using the default board 443. So let's go ahead and click proceed. And let's log in with the admin password that we set once we formatted the device. Now, as you see in here, I'm back to my firewall. I'm able to access everything again, except that I lost all my configuration. If we go into the interfaces, I see that I got back the LAN interface, which is a virtual switch interface that contains ports internal 1 up until internal 7, which I deleted earlier. And I also see the Wi-Fi came back, which I also disabled because I don't use it. Also, if we go into policy and object, I will have only the single policy to access the internet, which also using a different board than the one I'm using. This is using WAN 1 and I'm actually using WAN 2. So everything right now is using the default settings. Now the simplest way to restore the backup file which we downloaded before, the .conf file, is to go in here and just click the admin menu again, go configuration. Instead of using the backup option, and this time we will use restore. I can tell you from here, since we are restoring the firmware through different firmware version, so I came from version 6.2.1 and now I'm trying to restore it to version 6.4.1. It may work, it may not work, but in most cases, if you want to make sure the firmware will likely to be restored successfully, just try to keep the firmware version on the same level, and then if you want to upgrade your firmware after, you can do so. So let's try to upgrade it now that we know the versions are different, and just choose .conf file and click OK. This will restore the device because it will restore the configuration. Let's hit OK and let's try to watch what is happening in here through the COM board. This is our console board connecting to the firewall. Now the device has came back up. The good thing is now I see ElastiCourse as the host name, so I know for sure some of the configuration has been restored. Also telling me that there has been errors, which is common. So let's copy this command. It's called diagnose debug config error log read. And then let's try to log in using the admin password we were using before we break the firewall. And the good thing is I'm able to log in back to the firewall. Now let's run the command diagnose debug config error log read. You will see in here the errors that happen during the firewall restore. Things like command parse error, ambiguous command, 40 single sign-on disable. It don't seem to be something that is affecting us. Now if this worked correctly, I expect this to no longer work because now it will go back to using the custom board I was using before, which is the case. So now let's try to change this to 8443. And the good thing is I'm able to access the firewall using the old custom port. Now that we are back in here, I'm able to access everything back again. Now let's go back to my network interfaces. And the good thing is I no longer have the virtual switch. Everything is back as it was. The internal 2, internal 4, the other board had been removed from the virtual switch. Now also if I go to my policy and object, I will see my older firewall policy has been restored as is. Now everything is working as expected. The firewall configuration restore worked like a charm in our case, but what if it didn't? What if your restore command failed for whatever reason, or what if you are an advanced user and you want to see how to do it the hard way? We can also do the same by taking the important commands from the configuration file and push it manually to the device in case the restore didn't work, or if we are advanced user and we are trying to do a complex migration through a version that is really high from what we are running right now. Mostly the restore wouldn't work. So I want to show you how to do this by going into the console. Now let's do a crazy command and let's just format the device one more time. So I want to do the command execute factory reset. This will format my device again and I will lose all the configuration. Now as you see, once the firewall has fully booted, now I'm back 2.0. It's showing me the old host name and all the configuration has been lost. Now let's see how we can prepare the configuration file for migration manually so that we can get over the issue of the file cannot be restored, or if we want to do a specific migration project. Now I want to switch to my Notepad++. This is my ElastiCourse configuration backup file that I downloaded earlier. You'll see here different configuration structures like the global settings, the account profiles that is assigned to my admin accounts, also the interface configuration, the policy, the addresses, the custom port, everything that I have configured on my firewall. So now the way we can migrate this manually is we can copy the selective parts of the configuration file that we need to import into our device, and this will simply match whatever the device had without restoring the full configuration file and cause a conflict. So let's start by copying the important parts of the configuration in a separate file so we can restore it to the firewall. Now as you see here, the global setting will contain things like the custom admin port, the custom HTTPS port 8443, custom hostname ElastiCourse, the time zone that I'm using, the timeout on the firewall, the IPv6 being enabled on the firewall, all kind of stuff. So this section we're gonna copy first. This is not gonna cause any issue if we copy it as is. Now this is the first section that we're gonna copy from the firmware. Now the next part is the account profile. This is the admin profile that is assigned to our admin account. As we see in here, there are SuperAdmin and ProfAdmin. They are both looks the same read-write for most options, but this could be different names for different levels of firmware. We know that the account profile is something that will be assigned to an admin account. So I know my admin account is called admin, so I just want to search for edit admin. This is my admin account, and it will say in here the account profile is SuperAdmin. So I know that the SuperAdmin is the account profile used in this version. So let's go back and search for this command in the firewall, config system account profile, and let's do a show. As you see in here, I only have my ProfAdmin. So maybe the SuperAdmin was something in the older version 6.2.1 and 6.4.1 does not have it. So I know for sure I don't have this part. So we need to copy this part as well to make sure our admin account is copied as is. And make sure you always start with the config and end with the end so that you end up in the same level you were at before. So we're going to add this to our script. Now let's go down and start looking into our system interface. As you see in here, this is my WAN 1 and it's set status down. So I turn off the WAN 1 interface manually. So I might need to copy this as well for the WAN 1 interface. For the WAN 2 interface, it's set to DHCP and I'm using this to connect to the internet. So I'm going to copy this part as well. Now for the DMZ, I'm not using the DMZ board, so I'm going to ignore this interface. I'm just going to copy the first part for now. Now let's continue with the remaining of the interfaces. This is the internal to network that is separate from the other networks. So I want to copy this as well. This is very important. And same for my Wi-Fi interface. So let's add this to our script. Now let's continue with the remaining of the interfaces. The modem interface is just a default interface that is assigned by default. We don't need to do anything with that or with the SSL that root. Now for the LAN interface, this is the virtual switch interface that is configured automatically in the firewall. If we try to search for this on the firewall right now, it should be already there. Let's do config system interface and verify to edit LAN and do a show. You'll see in here it has the same IP address 192.168.199/24. It's type switch and it's LAN. So we don't need to copy this portion of the configuration. We can leave this for now. And as you see, we don't need anything else in the interfaces. We just need to copy the ending part so that we can go back to the main level. Now we also need to do one more thing in here to make sure the file is properly configured. There is something called set SNMP index. This is something that is the order of the interface in the list. The FortiGate would not like you to send this to it when you restore the configuration, so we should be removing these files. Now instead of going every line and finding this set SNMP index, you can utilize the Notepad++ feature for marking the line and removing them. So let's do a Control F to search within the file. It already got the string that I copied, set SNMP index. Instead of searching for it, which is going to be like 4 matches, we can go into the Mark tab and just bookmark line. Once you do this and do mark all, this will match all the lines that has this word that we do not need. And then we can simply use the search bookmark, and then we can do remove bookmark lines. This way we remove all the lines that has set SNMP index so the firewall wouldn't complain about it. Now let's continue with the firmware file. We can see in here the system virtual switch contained only the port internal 1, 3, 5, 6, and 7. We remove port 2 and 4 and we assign them as separate networks on the top. So if you try to push the script as is with the internal 2 and internal 4, you're most likely going to run into an issue. Let's test it out. If we do a next, now we are back to the interface level. So if we were to try to edit the internal 2 on this current configuration, and let's do this. As you see, it says internal 2 has been added, and it's not really showing the real interface internal 2. That's because the internal 2 is still part of the virtual switch. And I had a separate video on the virtual switch in my introduction to FortiGate course, but simply we need to remove these manually before we proceed with this. I know this may sound complicated, but you have to think about the logic where the firewall thinks before you start configuring it. So in here, before we start letting the firewall know to edit internal 2 and internal 4, we need to remove these two interfaces from the virtual switch using the same commands that are set in here. We're going to copy config system virtual switch, edit internal, config port, and then we're going to remove internal 2, remove internal 4. So let's do this before we go into the system interface. So right in here between the end for the account profile and the system interface, let's remove the set virtual switch. Don't need that. And in here, we're just gonna add up the two lines, config port, delete internal 2, and then delete internal 4. And then we're gonna do an end. This will put us back to the internal part. And then let's do another end. This will go back to the main menu. So now we successfully removed the two ports from the virtual switch, so that when we do the interface configuration, internal 2 and internal 4 will start accepting the configuration because they are no longer part of the virtual switch. Now let's continue with the configuration side. All these stuff are just default, like the custom language. I have not added any custom language, so I can just ignore any default configuration because they already exist in the device. Like I said, anything you are not sure about, you can just copy it and just go back in here and write the same command and then do show. You will see the same settings by default: English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, English, French, Spanish, Portuguese. So nothing in here need to be copied, it already exists. Now let's go down. This is my system admin. This contains my admin account, which is called admin. It set my account profile to the SuperAdmin profile, and it also contains things like the widget positioning, how I set up my widget, like the security fabric, the admins, the CPU usage. So this is just more of a customization part, so I can copy this as well. But the more important part in this configuration, beside the styling of the widgets, down below we're gonna find also a section for the password in the encrypted format. So this will restore my password from the current password that I set temporarily to the password I had before I format my device. So we're gonna copy this admin configuration and add it after the system interface configuration. Now let's go back and continue with our setup. Config system HA would basically set up the clustering. If you had a cluster set up, you will copy the information from here to restore your cluster information. I don't have any cluster right now. You will see that there is no configuration in this side. So this can be left alone. Things like the system storage are also by default and you don't need to be copied over. Now for the system DNS, as you see, this is the FortiGate DNS that is set up by default, and this also has my domain ElastiCourse.local. I don't need to copy this part simply because I'm using a different DNS server from my client that I push through the DHCP server. This is coming more down, so we're gonna ignore this part for now. All these stuff is just the replacement messages and other pages that are by default. We just ignore this for now. Now we get the system info for the SNMP. I set up an SNMP community back when I was showing you how to set up the PRTG versus the SolarWinds NPM. This in here, this used to be my community name, but there is no server set up in here. So I don't need to copy this part, but if you are using SNMP community, just make sure you copy this part and this part. Now the auto update part will restore my auto update schedule for the FortiGuard services. This includes the IPS, the antivirus, and other settings. Right now I don't have a license to update these things, but I'm gonna copy it anyways just to show you how to do it. So now this also added to our script. For the central management, this used to be the FortiManager that we used in the FortiManager course. It was living on the AWS side, and this was the IP address. This is no longer live, so I'm going to ignore this part since I no longer have a central manager. Now the next important part we have right here is the config system settings. This includes settings like the feature visibility that allows you to see different options in the GUI based on which features you use. As you see in here, I enabled the GUI load balance to show you how to load balance servers using the virtual servers. This might be already enabled. The IPS enable allows you to see the intrusion prevention. If you want to see which options are showing right now, you can copy the same command. So let's do config system settings and do a show. Right now there is nothing is set, so it's only using the default settings. So if we do a get, we can see the actual settings in the background. You will see in here the GUI load balance is disabled. The GUI IPS is disabled. So this is why if we go in here and try to see the IPS, we would not be able to do so. So the good thing is we can copy this portion to see all the options we used to see before we format our device. And we're going to add this to our script. In here, we can see the DHCP server. This is very important, and it allows me to get IP addresses for my LAN interface, which is the virtual switch interface. This still has interfaces internal 1, internal 3, internal 5, 6, and 7. So these are all the virtual switch interfaces that I have not removed from the stack, and it's assigning IP addresses from the same network 192.168.1.0, specifically starting from 110 up until 210. So this is important. It also has a reserve IP based on MAC address, and this is something that I used before for the FTP Dropbox video. So I want to copy this portion, and it will also include the internal 4, which is my Wi-Fi network. It has 10.10.100.0/24, and it also has a custom DNS server, which is OpenDNS. And the last one we have is my internal 2, which is I was using on this specific PC, and it's giving me 172.20 addresses. So I'm going to copy all this DHCP server. We have a total of 3 DHCP servers set up, and I'm going to copy this part and add it to my script. Now let's continue with our configuration. The firewall address portion is very important. This includes all the firewall addresses used on our firewall policy. We're going to start by copying the title. And the reason I do this is we don't need to copy all the default ones. You'll see things like fabric device, firewall auth portal, SSL VPN tunnel address. All these things are default. Starting from here, I start seeing things I have been using personally, from fully qualified domain names like storage.google APIs, VPN, 192.168/16. All these addresses I have been using, local on-prem, AWS. So I'm going to copy all these addresses that are assigned inside my policies up until the end part of the section. Now I have all my addresses that are dependent on the policies. And another thing we need to remove in here is the UUID. This is a unique ID that is assigned to addresses. And also the firewall will not be happy if we try to give it these things right now, because they are automatically assigned and they should not be included in your script. So we're going to do the same thing we did with the SNMP index. We're just going to search for this command. There is a total of 10 matches. I want to go to mark. I want to bookmark all these 10 matches. And using the search menu, I want to go to search, bookmark, remove bookmark lines. So now all my addresses just contain the important information, the type, and the fully qualify. If it's an address, it just contains the subnet. So now all my addresses are correct, and the end belonging to the config firewall address. So everything is okay. I want to go enter, and we can continue. The multicast address is just the default. The firewall IPv6 addresses, I'm not using IPv6, so I don't have anything except the default. Same for multicast address for IPv6. Now firewall wildcard, fully qualified domain name custom, those are also default that come with the firewall, like Opera, Apple, Microsoft. Those are also created by default, and they are also not dependent, or they are not assigned to any of my policies, so I don't have to worry about them. So let's ignore this part and keep going down. These are the firewall service categories. So every port or every service you configure on the firewall can be assigned to a category, or it can be just uncategorized. Those are just default. I've not been categorizing any of my ports, so I can simply ignore this part. Now comes to the firewall service custom. Those are the ports assigned to my policies. So I need to copy this part for sure, add it to our section, and let's go down. In here we have all, this is by default created. We have DNS, HTTP. Those are all the default services that come with the firewall. You will know for sure because they are all nice and categorized inside like web access, email. So you know for sure those are not mine. So I want to keep going down until I see my custom board. You can see in here all these well-known boards are created by default up until all SNMP. And then now I see my custom board like 8443. I use this to manage the firewall. And also SSH may be created, but let's copy it as well up until the end portion. And let's add this to our firewall service custom. So the good thing with service custom, there is no UUID or anything of that sort. We only have the board. Now the service group allow you to put multiple services that we seen above in the service custom portion in a board group, so that instead of having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 services in one policy, it will show up as email access. So it will show up as one service, but inside of it there are 7 different boards. So in here we are not really creating any of these service groups, or we are not using any of these service groups in our policies, plus they are created by default. Let's make sure this is the case. And let's do config firewall service group, do a show. You will see in here, those are the default: email, web, Windows, Exchange, email, web, Windows, Exchange. So we don't need to copy anything for this. For the certificate part, for VPN, we can also ignore this. Those are things you usually don't have to copy because they do change. Now the next part is the config IPS sensor. This allows me to create different profiles for different IPS sensors, and I might have modified some of these, and I also created the high security one, which is set up for different criticality and different vulnerability levels and different exception. So it's good point to copy this section as well. If you are using any of these IPS, antivirus, web filtering, you have to copy the section corresponding to your site, so that you make sure that if they are included in your policies, that they work as expected. We're gonna copy this portion from the config IPS sensor up until end, so that we can restore this portion. We're gonna add it to our script. Now let's go back and see in here, this is the application list. So this is related to application control. I'm not really using application control, so I'm gonna ignore all the application control portion. Same for DLP, I'm not using DLP. Now we see things related to the web filtering. If you are using it, you will see here the different categories. They are just written in ID numbers instead of names as in the GUI. So make sure you copy it if you made any exception or different overrides, different approvals. Now for the user local, those are the local users assigned for the firewall, and they are used for things like SSL VPN portals and other services that require user login. So I want to copy this portion because this is used for my SSL VPN configuration. And I added it to my script. Now let's go down to our configuration. We see another portion here that is the user group. And we see in here that our SecOps member was included in a user group remote. So if we try to check this, this will not be in here for sure. Let's do an end. And if we do config user group and do show, we only have the single sign-on guest and the guest group. So I want to copy this custom group that I added and add it to the script. I just want to remove the default portion because it's already in there. So now we only have the remote that has SecOps. Now let's go down. This is my SSL Web Portal. This is the configuration that allow me to connect to the firewall and get access to my internal portal through the internet through SSL VPN. I want to copy this because it has my configuration site. It also, following that, has the SSL settings, which has the port number that listen on the firewall, so I can log into it. It has the interface that is connected to the internet, and it also has the user SecOps and the group remote access, full access. So those are the dependent part that we needed to copy the user and the user group before we do this portion. So let's copy this and add it in here. Now we see in here different user bookmarks. There are 2 bookmarks in here. They don't seem to have anything inside of it, but let's copy it as well to make sure nothing goes wrong. Now we see in here the config VPN IPsec phase 1 interface. This is the IPsec configuration that I created before for my AWS firewall. You see in here, this is an AWS firewall. There's an IPsec encryption and there is a different encryption proposal. I no longer have this VPN active, so I'm going to ignore this part. If you have any VPN actives, you need to copy this whole portion for the phase 1 and then later copy the phase 2 portion, which is going to be more down below. Now for the system DNS database, we use this in the Active Directory and single sign-on video. We no longer need this portion, so I'm going to ignore this for now. I'm just going to keep going down until the next portion. Now the very important portion that we need to copy next is the config firewall policy. This has all the firewall policies that we created, has all the source interface, destination interface, addresses, services, all that kind of important stuff. So we want to copy this and up until we reach the end portion. Those are my firewall policies. And like we did before with the addresses, there is also a UUID section that we do not want to copy over. I want to copy this and count again. There are 6 firewall policies and 6 set UUID lines. Let's mark those lines and then remove it in the same manner. Search, bookmark, remove bookmark lines. So now our firewall policies are all set. You can copy over. Now we can keep going down. The next part I'm going to copy is the log settings. This allows me to enable the logging on the implicit deny policy, which is disabled by default. Also enables it for IPv6 if you use IPv6. It also enables the local end policy logging, which contain the logs related to the firewall interfaces themselves, inbound and outbound. So let's copy this portion and let's add it to our script to make sure our implicit deny policy is being logged and the local end policy logs are being collected. Now in here you will see the config router side. If you have any static routes and any dynamic routing, this will be copied in here. If you don't have anything, you don't have to worry about it. I don't have any static routes in this case, but if you have to copy them over in this section. And as you see, once we finish this part, we are actually at the end of our configuration file. So out of the 6,400 lines of configuration, a lot of them were just default information or just features that we do not use. I was able to collect the important information from the firewall using only 650 lines. So the way we can restore this, we can use the terminal in here so that we can push all this information to the device. Now let's try to do this and see if we made any mistakes. Now if you're not comfortable about copying the whole files and pushing it to the firewall at once, you can simply do portions piece by piece. So let's try to do a few to get a hang of it. I want to copy this portion first, the config system global, and I'm just going to go to the body client and right click so I can restore this stuff. You'll see in here, once you see everything shown in a separate line, it means they were copied normally. So if we do a show before we do the end, you'll see in here I got my host name, everything back. If I do an end, this is the first sign that things are being pushed back. I got my custom host name again. Now let's start with the config system profile up until the virtual switch. Now let's do a right click. So as you see in here, it gives me an error related to the SuperAdmin account profile cannot be added or edited because of duplication or reservation. We know that the SuperAdmin is no longer being accepted in the newer firmware version, even though it was used in an older version. We know that because our admin account all the way down was using the account profile SuperAdmin. And if we go right now into the admin account, so let's do a config system admin, we see that's still using SuperAdmin, but SuperAdmin was not really showing, which is weird, but maybe they are hiding this for whatever reason. So we can simply ignore this portion. We're just going to remove this set account profile. And this way we are just pushing to our admin account the GUI display customization we did and the password that we were using before we format our device. So let's go back up and let's remove this version because it didn't work in our case and we didn't need to do anything with that. Now let's do the portion for the system virtual switch. First, let's get out of admin. We need to be in the main menu. Then let's do this. And now if we do the show, now we no longer have internal 2 and internal 4 in our virtual switch. So now we can proceed with our system interface configuration. Copy this portion from the 1.1 interface up until internal 4. Let's first go into end and then end one more time to go back to the main menu. And then let's push the interface configuration. Looks like internal 2 added another edit for some reason and it said unknown. So let's do a show one more time. Let's see what happened in here. We can see in here internal 4 was copied properly but not internal 2. So sometimes things don't work as expected. Let's copy it one more time and see if it's gonna work this time. Make sure you are in the interface level, not inside a specific board. And this time it did work. So now let's do a show. So now we have our WAN 1 with the status down, WAN 2 with the DHCP. This is my internet board. And all the way in the end, I have my internal 2 and internal 4, both with the correct IP addresses. So now we are good with the interfaces portion. Now let's move into our admin account configuration, which has the widgets and the password. We're gonna copy this side, go back to the main menu, and let's paste this side. So now once I did this, because I changed the password on the admin account, it immediately kicked me out once I put the end to save the configuration for the admin. So now if I try to log in again with the admin account that I used right now, it's not gonna accept my credential because I have to use my old password that I used before I break the device completely. I want to do the old password and now I'm back in. Now we are getting back into more normal state for the firewall. Now let's continue with our script. Now we are back to the auto update side. So let's copy this and also copy the system setting to save up the time. So as you see in here, certain things did not like it. We don't really need to worry about the SIP helper. If things don't work, but they don't really break the other parts of the script, it wouldn't be a problem for us. But the update section got enabled correctly. Actually, let's go one more time to config system settings and let's do a show. You'll see in here we got the local balance enabled, the IPS enabled, all the important stuff, allow unnamed policy, just not that SIP helper, which we don't need to worry about, we are not using. Now for the system DHCP portion, now before we do this, I want to show you my network interface. Let's do ibconfig/all. If I check my interface right now, the Intel Ethernet, my interface connecting to the firewall, you'll see that 169.254, this is an IP address you would get only if you can't communicate to the DHCP server and get a proper IP address. So anything start with 169.254, you know for sure DHCP server is not working, which is the case in here. We don't have it yet, but I wanted to show you before we copy it, and then we're gonna check once we do it. So this is our LAN interface DHCP server. This might already exist, but we are also adding it with the specific reservation based on MAC address, the specific DNS server, and also the one for port 4 for our Wi-Fi client, and the one for port 2, which is going to fix my desktop connection. So I'm going to copy whole DHCP server side. I'm going to go back to the main menu first, and then I'm going to save this part. It seems like it does not like the DNS server portion. Let's do a show and see what exactly did not copy over. So we got our LAN DHCP server. This is the default gateway. This is the start IP and IP, the reservation for the MAC addresses. It just copied everything except the DNS server. but it did copy the DNS server in here, just did not copy it in the first and the last one. So let's do edit one. Let's do a show one more time. This may be caused because of this DNS service command. So let's do this. Let's do onset DNS dash service, and then let's try to push this command one more time. Okay, perfect. So now we are working and the DNS server got added. So now let's go to next, and then let's do edit 3, which is our third DHCP server for the PC. Let's do a show. It did not accept the DNS server 1. This statement was causing the issue. So I want to do onset DNS service, and I'm going to copy these two lines. I'm going to paste it on DHCP server 3. So now the part got accepted. Now let's do a show one more time. So now we have our DNS server for DHCP server 1, DNS server for DHCP server 2, and DNS server for DHCP server 3. So we fixed the issue with the DNS server. Now let's move on for the next part, which is our firewall addresses. Now we are getting to the portion that is very important, which is the dependency for the firewall policies. So let's copy these and let's go first to the main menu. Now looks like all of them got added with no issue. I don't see any errors. Everything is showing new entry and it moves on to the next object. So we will know for sure once we push the policy if we made any mistake, because it's going to say this object does not exist. Now our next portion is going to be the service custom, which is the firewall services or ports. Copy it and paste it as well. And as you see, everything got copied with no issue. Now let's move to the IPS sensor. Gonna copy our profiles. Now our IPS sensor got added with no errors as well. Now let's go ahead and copy our local users and our user groups. It seems like it did not like the attribute, the password time, which is something that is assigned by the firewall itself. It says you are not allowed to change it. This is not a deal breaker. It allowed me to create the board, and when I created the user group inside it with the member, it accepted it, so everything worked. It just did not like that specific portion. Now we can move ahead and copy the SSL VPN portal and the SSL settings related to our SSL portal and also the user bookmarks. So the only error we got is about the default factory certificate. This is no problem. This is just letting us know we are not using a custom certificate, but all the information related to the SSL VPN got copied with no errors. So we can move ahead and copy the last portion and the most important one, which is the firewall policy. Now this portion I recommend you just do one by one initially to make sure it's copying over with no issue. So this is our first policy. We do a show. We got our firewall policy number 6 added with no issue. As you see, it start assigning UUID by itself. That's why we did not want to copy them over, because that's a firewall work. But as you see, this is the default policy that was created with the firewall when we first added it, and it allows DLAN to connect to WAN 1. I have WAN 1 disabled, so this policy is really not part of our policy list. So let's do delete 1 to make sure we are not adding this policy over. Now let's do a show one more time. We have our single policy number 6. So now we are moving in the right path. Let's copy 2 policies at the time now. So it did not like the FortiGate single sign-on disabled, but it was part of the old configuration. Same for the profile protocol options custom default. It seems that we did not copy this over, but let's see how does it look now. So they were copied over, they just did not copy this portion with the 40 single sign-on and the profile protocol option custom default, which I don't even remember creating, so maybe this is something that we don't need to worry about. Now let's copy the rest of the policies, number 4, number 9, and 10. We got the same error for the 40 single sign-on, which is no problem. Now the final part for us is the log settings, which allows us to log the implicit deny and the other local policies. So let's copy this portion. And now everything should be back as is with the custom script that we created. So now let's try to log in again to the firewall and see how does it look. First sign is the custom port works fine. So this is a good start. Now once I log in with my username and password, I see the good sign. I'm back with my custom widgets that were in place. I'm using my custom password. Let's go into the interfaces. My PC and my Wi-Fi internal interfaces are working correctly outside of the virtual switch. My WAN 1 is disabled and WAN 2 is my internet connection. It worked fine. And now let's check back the PC. It was not able to grab the IP address earlier. Now let's do the same command again and go back to the Ethernet. And now I'm back to 172.20.0.20. Now I'm back on the network. I have a valid IP address. If I try to ping an IP address outside, I'm able to reach the internet. Now let's check the policy and object. And now our policies is back as is. The implicit deny has the login enabled. And if we go down to check our log settings, we also have the local traffic logging enabled. So now we were able to restore everything. This is more advanced way to restore the configuration, but sometimes you need to do it this way if you are not able to simply restore the configuration file using the configuration restore option. You can also import the whole script that we created in here using the script option. But as you see, if you try to do this, you might run into issue and it's also going to fail in the middle. It's going to get you more frustrated because you don't know which issue happened inside. You simply need to do it this way so you can see this kind of error and see if the error is big enough that it blocked the script or it blocked the order of the script in a way where you have to make adjustment before you continue with the remaining of the script. And those were the two ways you can use to restore your configuration back to your freshly installed device using the configuration backup or using building a custom script for your firewall. Thank you for watching.